We will call the April 1st meeting of the Jericho Planning Commission to order. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, fellow Planning Commission members. I think we should acknowledge how bright and light it is outside and pretend we don't notice how cold it is outside. But the days getting longer definitely make it easier to drive to a meeting in Town Hall. Tonight's agenda, we will have some time for public comment, and the Planning Commission will review and approve our minutes of March 18th, our previous meeting. The bulk of our time this evening, we are continuing work on a draft of potential zoning amendments, which are under consideration and up for discussion by the Planning Commission, as we have been working on for several months. The main focus of these changes is Chapter 13, also known as the character-based zone, which one of the things that we have drafted is a change to that section of the zoning and to call it the Riverside form-based code. Tonight we're going to look at a few specific components of that code, thoroughfares, and also a red line review. So we have a working document now. We have spent several months discussing concepts, learning about the form-based code, looking at Jericho's town plan and the goals and what kinds of changes would need to be made in order to meet those goals. And all of that work has been boiled down into a red line document, which is very much in draft form. It is not final. It is not actually, this is just the first time the Planning Commission is looking at a red line in many months. We saw an early version of a red line produced for us by David White many months ago. And then we did a lot of work on it, and tonight will be kind of a first look at that red line. We're also going to hear from David about Section 10, which is in the main part of the zoning that deals with permit procedures and review procedures, because part of this grant is to implement some of the recommendations from a guide produced by the state to enable better neighborhoods. And one of the key recommendations is to streamline permit and review procedures so that more development can be approved administratively and not require review from the Development Review Board. So that's what Section 10 is all about. Then we're going to move on to a totally different topic, but related, where the town of Jericho is likely to form a wastewater task force and has invited the Planning Commission to participate in that. The town is applying for a grant to help fund some consulting to guide the task force, and the Planning Commission is required to sign that application or endorse that application. So we're taking that action this evening. Pretty administrative action, basically. Then we'll hear from the town planner and catch each other up on reports and our liaisons work. Look at any other business, plan our next meeting on April 15th, and then adjourn. That was a little bit of a long explanation on the agenda, but I thought that it was important because we have a lot of people on the Zoom. Thank you for joining us, and a lot of people in the room. Some people come and go, track the project here and there. Thought it would be helpful to make sure that everyone was kind of level set as to where we are and what we're discussing this evening. Does anyone from the Planning Commission need to propose any changes to the agenda? Okay, good to go. Next then is public comment. So we will take public comment. Our rules of procedure require that public comment can be on any topic that you want. However, we prefer if your comments at the beginning of the meeting are related to things not necessarily on the agenda, and to limit your comments to 3 minutes. So would anybody in the room like to offer a comment to the Planning Commission? And if you come forward to the microphone that's in the ceiling, please, and state your name and give us your brief.
Hi, I'm Bill Butler, and thank you for having us, and thanks to the attendees. I wanted to just say that Michael Ullman and I are a bit dismayed after the previous Planning Commission meeting. It seemed that you weren't going to allow a building the size of our proposed Wisdom House main building. I think it was our opinion that you like the design, you like the purpose, which is to serve our seniors and the community at large, but you didn't like the size. So one of the things I think we all want to do is answer the mandate that the citizens of Jericho have given us to maybe not solve, but work on what we see as an upcoming senior housing crisis. So that's what we are trying to address. We've been very fortunate to have the support of the state of Vermont. And the Vermont Department of Housing likes our design, likes our concept. They would like to use it. They would like to use Wisdom House at Riverside as a model to bring around the state for what they'd like to see other towns do. And we've offered to be as helpful as possible. They're also aware of the last meeting and your concerns, and have written to myself and Chris, and I've copied you, Susan, that the state housing department would like to get together with us and try to work out a way to alleviate your concerns and move the project forward. I feel really fortunate that it's taking this path, and it's a really amicable and creative, and everyone's a player. Everyone is involved, and they really want to see this happen. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for being brief. Anyone else from the room have a comment? If anybody on the Zoom has a comment you'd like to make, if you wouldn't mind using the raise hand feature in the reactions section of the Zoom screen. Wait 1 second. Let's see. Can you see everybody?
I can see everybody.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to the minutes.
And let's remind people not to use the chat.
Oh, yes. At the Planning Commission meetings, we only use the chat. Participants, please only use the chat for a technical issue, like you can't hear, somebody's muted, something like that. We don't use the chat for any comments. We need a full public record on the recording and in our minutes, and we cannot respond and we cannot acknowledge, we will not acknowledge comments in the chat. Which makes it too crazy for everyone. Okay, so now I would entertain.
Wait, now.
Now there's a hand up. Okay, perfect. Lois Whitmore, you can, we unmute you. Yep, go ahead and make your comment. Hi.
Hi, I live in Essex, and I've been really interested in this project, but I've also been involved in some of the concern over the potential advent of Amazon in Essex Junction. And one of the questions I had was, given the fact that the Route 15 corridor is one of the transport corridors and their intentional service area is a 70-mile radius, I wondered if Jericho had any concerns or opinions about the increased traffic on the area in which you're intending to put infill housing.
Okay, thank you for your comment. We won't really respond to that directly. We might need to have some discussion and some research about it before we would review that, but that is, traffic in general is a consideration when zoning changes, when development happens, when growth happens. So that is a typical consideration. Our planning commission has not specifically discussed any development proposals in Essex. And just to clarify, this meeting is about zoning amendments for Jericho, and it is not a meeting about any specific project, and we're all interested in the real world application of zoning, but it's important for us to have the correct state of mind when we are having our discussions and when we are reviewing the language. We as Bill said, we're very enthusiastic about lots of ideas and lots of projects for Riverside, but our work tonight is on zoning amendments and not about a specific project. Okay. Any other public comments? Okay, so now can I hear a motion to approve the minutes of March 18th?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second. SJ, second. Thank you. Any discussion, corrections, clarifications, edits needed on the minutes? Okay, so all those in favor of approving the minutes of March 18th as submitted, say aye. 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 And Eric, we see you on the Zoom. Eric Littman from the Planning Commission is attending remotely. So can you
Yes.
vote to?
I am here and I will abstain.
Abstain. Oh, right, you weren't here. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so now we're moving on to topic number 5, a discussion of Jericho's project to modernize our bylaws. I'm going to pass it over to town planner Greg.
Great, thank you. I'll move on to the next slide. So, like Susan already mentioned, there are two primary things we're going to be talking about tonight. One is looking at thoroughfares. For thoroughfares, public space is really important in defining a place, and you get that right, and everything else kind of falls in around it. So that's something I wanted to focus on. And then the red line review got sent out, so general discussion on that, but also some follow-up on some discussion from the last planning commission meeting and some changes that were made in response to those discussions.
Why is not letting me?
You guys on the laptop see the same thing on the screen, or do you
Yeah, I
see
do.
something different? Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
The next one?
Yeah. Oh, great. And it's moving relatively quickly.
Sorry, apologize.
Great. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because we've gone through this at the last meeting, but basically in terms of our schedule, we're still on track. We still have a lot to cover to get to where we want to be by the end of June. We do have an additional meeting scheduled at the end of April. And the plan is to have the Planning Commission public hearing on these amendments in late May, and then the select board hearing in late June. So we're still shooting for that for our final goal. If you want to go to the next slide. So this is our schedule for the Planning Commission between now and the end of June. This week, we're going to be discussing recommended changes to thoroughfares in section 13 in general. We're also going to get a preview from David White on some changes that we want to be making to section 10 related to permit and review procedures. So that's more just of a heads up so that you know what's going to be coming and what to look for. Want to go to the next slide. So tonight we're going to go more in depth to the changes for thoroughfares. Also some follow-up from last week's discussion on building, the last planning commission meeting discussion on building types and element types. Thank you for some of you who have already sent me your comments on the Section 13 draft. Those have been really helpful in getting those ahead of time. Before I go in to get into more detail on the thoroughfares, I wanted to ask Chris Brown if you had anything you wanted to say, because I know we've had a working group with Chris Brown, Susan, and myself. They've just been a lot of work. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything to help cue up the discussion for those two items.
I'd be happy to. So again, the civic spaces, blocks, and thoroughfares, those are the large overview ways of making space in a new section of town like we're going to be doing. So it's just the highest level of space making. So civic spaces in Riverside may include like a park or public space, blocks and thoroughfares, and those really set the tone for the feeling of the neighborhood. And then building form types and elements, again, it's thing to bear in mind with the building types. One thing to bear in mind is that it's really about the size of the buildings almost more than the label of the type. So a house, for example, could be a small, doesn't have to be residential. It could be just a small building. And then we've added some additional building types, and we've fleshed out and clarified more of the element types, which are the tools to get the pedestrian-friendly scale that we're looking for throughout the development.
Great, perfect, thank you. If you want to go to the next slide. So for thoroughfares, there's currently a section of Section 13 that is strictly based on thoroughfares. So there are currently 4 types of thoroughfares in the code. There's something on bike lanes, there's something on alleys. So the changes that we're reviewing tonight is simplifying this. We're narrowing it down to just one type of roadway and one type of thoroughfare. For one that's easier to administer, and also if it's ever turned over to the city, to the town, it's easier to maintain. There's consistency in what we're looking at. The guidelines that we're going to be looking at tonight, they rely very heavily on Vermont's Complete Street Guide. It uses dimensions that get what we need to create a pedestrian-friendly neighborhood, compact and walkable village, but using the minimum land possible to set aside for a road right away. Also, the recommendations of the Enabling Better Places Guide, that's the document that's informing all of our decisions that we're looking at as part of this grant. Also recommends looking specifically at the Complete Streets Guide to inform the work as we're updating the guide. So that's helpful for that too. We've coordinated the streetscape guide, the streetscape and public space standards with flexible requirements with how to treat front yard setbacks on private property, which are experienced as part of the public realm. So the public realm is what you generally see and experience when you're walking down the street. Something might be private property and public space, but there's not a wall. You don't perceive it as such. You just experience it all as a holistic environment that you are walking through. So that is the environment that we are trying to shape specifically for Riverside. So when you combine the public space standards that we're looking at tonight with the element types that we talked about last week, and we're going to go into a little bit later in this meeting, that really creates the environment that prioritizes the pedestrian scale that we want to create an experience. So if you want to go to the next slide. So I'm just going to walk through the different components of the public space right of way. So this is a similar graphic to what's in the existing regulations, although it's been updated to reflect some changes based on the Complete Street Guide from Vermont. So you can see on the left, there's the right of way components. That includes, among other things, travel lanes, parking lanes at the curb, the street tree box, and the sidewalk, and the curb radius. All of those have minimum dimensions that are coming from the Complete Street Guide. Those elements of the public space are supplemented by the setback on private property that will help us get wider sidewalks in commercial areas and landscape yards and residential right-of-ways. So I mentioned that we were trying to use minimum dimensions to minimize the amount of land that would need to be set aside for street rights-of-ways. So in this scenario, the total right-of-way is 55 feet. In most cities across or towns across the country, 60 feet is standard, but 55 feet still works. That lets us get a 5 feet sidewalk, which is the minimum that the Vermont Complete Street Guide recommends. But like I said, you add that to some of the setback area, and it gets, at least for the commercial areas, it would get us up to 10 feet, which is the minimum recommended for village centers. So if you want to go on to the next slide. So the images here illustrate how the public and private property will work together to create that public realm. So on the left, you can see next to the building with a commercial use, there would be a paved sidewalk with standards that would require that the paving be the same material and grade of the adjacent sidewalk. That would be on private property as opposed to the public space. You can see where that delineation is. The setbacks and the regulations allow for 5 to 20 feet. I'm just showing it here in 5 feet, but it could be wider than that depending on what the applicant wanted to do. That would provide a little flex space, seating or outdoor retail space to help activate the street, which is something we want to see. On the right, you'll see a treatment that would be next to a residential area shown with landscaping. So here, the regulations that we've drafted would allow for minimal paving just to get you from the sidewalk to a building entrance. There would be some requirements for fences and hedges so that they stay at 36 inches. The fences would be predominantly open in design. You want that to maintain open sight line. That's not just aesthetics, it has a safety component to it. You don't want people being able to hide behind something. And then you can see on the left, those are the requirements for either a paved area or a landscaped area. And the way that it's set up, the property owner would have the option of using one or the other. So there's flexibility in how the property owner would do that. Yeah.
Yeah, just before you move on to make sure I'm entirely clear. So the landscaped areas that are listed are within the 5 to 20 feet before the sidewalk.
Correct. Yeah. So
That's what I thought it to be, but I just wanted to make sure. So it's not what happened between the sidewalk and the street. It's what happens between the sidewalk and the building.
correct.
Okay.
That's a good question because some cities have a really large tree box space between the curb and the sidewalk. Here, we're just saying we want it to be 5 feet. That's a good dimension. You can still get a good street tree. You've got a favorable amount of root zone. The tree can get fairly large without the roots buckling the sidewalks. So that's all good. Also, by having that landscaped area on the backside, that also opens up more root zone for the tree once the roots go to the sidewalk, at least for the residential scenario.
Thank you.
Yep. If you want to go to the next slide. Great. So that's the general framework that we've, so I pulled that together. We just discussed it as a working group. There seemed to be consensus that it was moving in the right direction. So the question for the Planning Commission in general is, are the changes in the thoroughfare moving in the right direction? Does this seem to be the right way to go? And do the requirements strike the right balance between what would be required for public space so that there's consistency and then flexibility for the private property owners? I'll say I didn't mention this during the discussion, but what is really good about how this is set up is that regardless of what's happening on each individual property, the public space, that 55 feet is consistent. You really want to have that nailed down. So if you have a scenario where things are developing incrementally, everyone's property is lining up as they develop over time. You might not have a scenario where we've got a lot of money and we're just building the whole street at one time. This allows us for incremental development. And at the end of the day, we have literally a complete street.
And so it is the same as Route 15?
The standards would be the same for Route 15. And what would change is the amount of space between the back of the sidewalk and the property line, depending on what the setback is.
Can you say that a different way?
Before you do, Chris, were you asking as Route 15 is now
I'm saying
versus
like
as it will be
the
in the
dimension,
future.
like the dimensional standards that are Route 15, either what
Currently.
we're expecting or currently will be the same throughout Riverside?
Actually,
Because
I'm gonna-
that feels like a really big, I don't know, that feels like a bigger scale for an inner neighborhood of Riverside, yeah.
I'm actually going to change my answer on that. So what we've looked at now is really for new streets that are being created.
Okay.
So in Riverside, for the streets as they're platted and built out, ideally these would be the dimensions that they're following. If someone's subdividing a larger property and they're having to put in a public or a private road, these would be the standards that they're following. You're raising a good question. I don't know what the right-of-way width is for Route 15. It might be around 66 feet. It might be 50 feet. I'd have to do some research to figure that out.
But that's outside of our control anyway.
No, I know, I'm just trying to get a handle on scale because
Yes,
I understand the
Yeah.
root structure and the program, but I don't understand, like,
If this helps, it allows someone to park on either side of the road.
on both sides of the
On
road.
both sides of the road with a relatively narrow drive,
2-lane.
2 lane.
So you've got 2 lane, you've got 2 parking, you've got your 5-foot tree, you've got your 5-foot sidewalk, and that's
Yes.
every road in Riverside. Okay.
Ideally. Now, the subdivision that has been approved has widths that range from, I think, 47 to 58. In every situation that I've worked, you have a standard and you're going to have to, ideally, you're going to have 55 feet everywhere to work with, but you're going to have to tweak it in certain situations based on what reality is. So, for example, if one of the streets move forward with development in Riverside and it only has a 47-foot right of way, but they wanted to use these standards, then we would work with them and figure out the best way to apply these standards within the right of way that they have. And maybe that means you only have parking on one side of the street.
And remember, there is also still the idea of an alley, which
Yes.
it creates, more very specific property to property circulation as opposed to circulation through the whole area.
Okay.
So it's not quite as all one size fits all literally as it sounds. It's better though, we think, because we're going from 4 types to 1 type, but still have alleys, still have passages. And then Chris added a type which is pedestrian only, which is not considered a thoroughfare, it's considered a public space. And so there are ways that you can have much more intimate. I think intimacy maybe is kind of what you're,
Well, yeah, and I'm kind of picturing like the width of what's 15 now, like, okay, well, we can put 1 and 2 through Riverside and we're done. That seems, like, it seems, I don't know, maybe the scale is off in my mind, but that seems huge to me for the scale of the area that we're talking about.
Can I ask a question? Is there a road that we might be familiar with that is this current dimension, the
But,
proposed
but
dimension?
while you think about that, as Chris just said, the plan that, you guys are familiar with the plan that's been submitted and approved, the site plan. As Chris said, those roads are not, they're in the ballpark of this size. And so that, I think that would help you, if you saw that again, that would help you understand that it's not just 2 super highways. It's
This is what it feels like. Okay, cool.
right.
So, I wanted to follow up on 2 things. These standards were not anticipated to apply to Route 15 because it's a state road and it has a bunch of other issues associated with it. So these standards were really thought of specifically in terms of how they applied to private development as they were moving forward off of Route 15. My second is actually, I'm going to ask David White. Do you know of streets in Burlington and what their widths are, and if those are in the 55-foot range?
So to your point, lots of streets are different. In a rural context in Vermont, you may have heard the term of 3 rods.
Yeah.
And typically a 3-rod road. So a 3-rod road is 49.5 feet wide. So a lot of our rural roads, the right of way is just under 50 feet. Burlington streets are all over the map. But if you think of many of the downtown streets you're familiar with, they're plus or minus 60 feet.
And
Except
then
for
we're talking with the tree box, with the sidewalks.
yeah, the sidewalks, tree belt, parking lane, travel lane, 60 feet for something like College Street, but Main Street is almost 100 feet wide.
What about like the new St. Paul Street? All
So-
that new stuff.
So a lot of that is 60 feet, I believe.
I mean, I guess, do
I would say, I
we
think
have this in Jericho?
those tree boxes on St. Paul are probably 5 to 6 feet. They've got LID incorporated with them, which is usually a little wider. And I'm just going from sight, that I think the sidewalks are.
The sidewalks are bigger, what you see for a tree box may be smaller typically, but because they're using a technology that allows the roots to spread under the sidewalk, and to interconnect from one tree box to the next, it allows for the opening for the tree trunk to be much smaller than you would typically find in a rural setting.
I mean, I think you're right, Susan, the alley.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And in Jericho, we don't have many streets or any streets really that are structured with parking on both sides of the street, plus sidewalks on both sides of the street. But, the Vermont Complete Streets Guide is what drove a lot of the dimensional standards. So that's thinking about Vermont. And that's why I was more confident taking these 4 types that were delivered by the consultants who did this code 20 years ago or 15 years ago or whatever. And Vermont has done so much work on bike ped and complete streets in the interim that wasn't available then. So we don't actually have to invent the wheel.
Yeah.
We can look at what is recommended for a village environment in Vermont when you want to prioritize pedestrian and neighborhood access and not through throughput, which is what Route 15 is focused on.
And these are really the minimum components and the minimum dimensions that you need to get what we want. In terms of having a pedestrian environment that has parking on both sides of the street and a reasonable amount of space for a street tree to be healthy.
We did talk about that one relatively straightforward accommodation for a situation if you couldn't have parking on both sides. Like one way that you could pigeonhole something in a little bit better is if you forfeited parking on one side as long as you had parking on the other, if other requirements could be met.
So I'll take back one thing I said. I'm just looking at, and you're welcome to look this up online. It's Great Streets BTV. So it is the design standards for the downtown streets in Burlington. So Bank Street, Cherry Street, Pearl Street, they're 66 feet right away.
I'll answer your question, Chris. Are we there?
Yes.
Call the question, Heidi.
I'll call the question. The question is, are changes to thoroughfare requirements moving in the right direction? What says you, commissioners?
Yes.
Yes.
And you are the best. You are the best at sticking to the question, so I appreciate it.
Eric, how do you weigh in on that question?
I think we're in the right direction.
Okay, I think so too. Shall we move on to the next question then? The next question is, do the requirements strike the right balance between required right-of-way standards and the flexible private space standards? It would be helpful if I could speak. All right, strike the right balance between right-of-way standards and flexible private space standards. What say you, commissioners?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes, again. Yes, again.
Thank you, team.
Thank you, Heidi.
Planning team, sub-team. I think we all love what you're doing. Thank
Great,
you.
thank you. Let's move on to the next slide. So moving on to the general village code red line, and following up from last week's discussion. So there was some discussion 2 weeks ago, or however long it was for the last planning commission meeting, about cottage courts having more than one principal building on a lot. So we've added a cottage court building type. I think there was some confusion last time about outbuildings and connector buildings, and I actually got some questions about it the weekend. So I've actually added a few images here to help clarify what those are. And then there was some questions at the last planning commission meeting about number of different element types. So like cornices, porches, window trims, stuff like that. What's the right number of element types for each of the buildings under this new approach that we're taking? So the working group kind of looked through each of those building types and came up with a number, and I'll kind of walk through that too. So if you want to go to the next slide. So a little more on the additional building types. So the first is the cottage court. So the standards that are used for this are based on national standards that the National Building Association, I think they did a study looking at some cottage courts that were done across the country. So I looked at those to kind of come up with what is in the draft that got sent out. Does allow multiple principal buildings on a lot. It establishes a max of 1,000 square feet for an individual building. And then there's a requirement that all of the individual cottages have to front onto a shared space. So it might just be part of that building, but they all have to have a connection to that common shared space. Yeah.
Is the 1,000 square feet the footprint or the gross?
Gross, as it's currently drafted. Yeah. In terms of outbuildings, so the outbuildings are a second building on the property. It can either be detached or attached, and I'll walk through that in the next slide. It is intended to read as secondary to the principal building. So as a working group, we kind of came up with an idea that it would be 60% of the gross floor area of the principal building. I think we want to go back and test that out a little bit in doing some drawings and make sure that that's the right percentage, but that's kind of where we are right now. The initial thinking was to allow that footage to be calculated as separate to the principal building and from the connector building. This can result in a really large building, so we're still kind of thinking through that. But then, like I said before, it can be both attached or detached from the principal building. And then the third building type that we added was a connector building. This is something that would connect the principal building to the outbuilding. So if you think of that traditional Vermont farmhouse that got added on incrementally over time, that connector building is that one that's in the middle. This is also intended to read as secondary, but in this case, both to the principal building and the outbuilding. We started out with thinking that that would be 25% of the principal building. Again, we kind of want to go back and test that and make sure that's the right number. And then this last one, it's a little confusing, a 6-foot minimum setback differentiation from the principal building. An outbuilding, that's a couple, $10 words. You'll see on the next slide exactly what that means. So if you go on a future slide, if you want to go to the next one. So here's just sort of a layout of what the cottage court would look like. This is, I would say it's probably idealized. The frontage width that is in the proposed in the amendments is 150 feet for the lot. What is shown here is 120 feet. That does not include, say, a 2-lane driveway going back to parking, which is behind the 2 buildings at the back of the court. This also requires a minimum 6-foot separation between buildings. That was something that I got from best practices from looking at what the National Building Association came up with. You can see here that all of the cottages front on that shared open space. In this scenario, that's 30 feet wide. I don't know all the economics that goes into a project like this. I don't know if that's realistic. 30 feet looks good, but it could be as narrow as 10 feet or whatever would make sense. And then in this scheme, the elements that are shown on the porches, since we've talked about on the cottages, since we've talked about element types before, This has porches, a roof overhang, and window trim. I think one of the comments that I got from a planning commissioner was concerned about how the elements might add cost to the building. I think I mentioned this at the last time too. These are pretty basic things, a roof overhang and window trim and a porch. So if they are adding costs, I think they'd be minimal costs to the building. And I don't know if he's here. I don't know, Jim, if Jim Carroll is online at the last planning commission meeting. He gave me a bunch of materials to look at, and one of them was specifically on cottage courts. So thank you, Jim, for that. And I hope you see your recommendations reflected here too. So thank you for that.
Can a cottage ever be a duplex? Or does the size, the gross floor area?
As it's currently drafted, oh, actually, I don't know if the regulations specify the number of units per cottage.
Yes, if you're maxing it at 1,000.
Could be small, but sure.
You have two 500 studios.
Hmm.
We did specify that a cottage court would need to have a minimum of 3 buildings and then a maximum of 10. I did see some other regulations that max out at 12. So 10's not a real scientific number, but I put it at 10.
I don't know if it's helpful, but I have some examples of cottage courts in Chittenden County that I pulled a while back, if that's useful.
That would be great. And I know Susan has sent me some examples. I think it'd be helpful to look at those, do some measurements, see what the lot coverage is. I think right now, it's not on the screen here, but in the amendments that got sent out, the lot coverage for this is 80%. That is based on the study that I looked at that allowed 65% lot coverage, and they said that that was too tight, that they thought that they needed more lot coverage, so I just bumped it up to 80%. This scenario, though, this is at 50%. So this shows a lot more open space.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to go, any questions on cottage courts before I move on? Okay. All right. So, like I mentioned over the weekend, some members had some questions about principal buildings versus outbuildings versus connector buildings. So what I've included here are illustrations of 2 ways of doing an outbuilding. The one on the left would be a detached outbuilding. So that's a principal building, which is a larger one. We'll just say that that's 100%. And then the outbuilding would be at 60%. These are not proportional. This is what I said we wanted to go back and look at the 60%. So when I did the 60%, it actually still looked really big. It didn't look that much smaller than the main building. So I think we want to look through that a little more. Same with the scenario on the left. This is the principal building. You can see the connector building in the middle and then the outbuilding. When I started to lay out what a 25% building looked like, it was pretty big based on the width of the building. So I don't know if the right number is 50%, maybe it is 25%, but that's something we want to take a look at and then come back to the commission with more information. And you can see here that little red arrow has 6 feet next to it. So you can see that there's a 6-foot differentiation between the facade of that connector building and the facade of the principal building. The reason why we're doing this is because we don't want the principal building, the connector building, and the outbuilding all to read as one continuous long facade, requiring that 6-foot setback, or it could be in the front. We're not specifying that the differentiation has to be in one direction, but it's creating a building facade that goes in and out, so it breaks up. In technical terms, it'd be breaking up the massing of the building, so it just breaks down into a smaller scale.
A connector cannot connect 2 principals?
As is
As
currently
it's currently written?
correct. As is currently written.
So we were thinking about like Legos almost. So if you look at the example on the right, you could think house, mudroom, garage, right? We've seen zillions of houses in Vermont that kind of follow that format. But you could also think of it much larger than that, and it could be like, you know, library, utility space, classrooms. So that's why we were looking at percentages so that it could be based on ratios and scale, but we don't think we got the numbers quite.
And I think I'm thinking of it as like Wisdom House, Breezeway, Wisdom.
Yes, so conceptually, as it's shown on the screen now, it's a house type, just to make it
Right.
easy to understand conceptually. But this same principle would apply to small apartments, small commercial, large residential commercial.
And the connector building could be just a hallway with a roof and walls.
It could be, it could be a meeting room.
But it couldn't connect to principals.
But the only difference
You
between
can have
a principal
principals
and an outbuilding is the
Is the
size of the
size.
building.
Yeah. Can you have two principals on? I'm sorry, I know I keep harping on this and I never know.
I don't
Yes.
have an answer. So
You should be able to have two principal buildings on a lot.
Okay.
in the form-based code
And what's
area.
being proposed for the form-based code, that's kind of the
Okay.
fundamental objective.
So you could have.
Then I would suggest that.
Any other questions on just this concept of these three building types?
It's amazing. It seems so simple and it takes 5 minutes to explain.
Oh my God, I'm sure it took hours.
I can't even.
And days to argue.
And many bags of pretzels.
Let's just say it's a good thing that it was a crummy weekend.
I heard about a marathon meeting.
If you want to go to the next slide. Okay, so this slide shows the diversity of building types. This is at scale. What is not shown here is the small commercial or civic building. I think the small commercial building is more in scale with the small residential building. I didn't fit it on here. So I think this gives an idea of the variety or options and the difference in scales of the building types that are allowed in Riverside. And this is a good slide to transition to the next one, which relates directly to the number of elements. But before we do that,
Yes, before we do that, since there are so many people on the Zoom, which is great, could you go back, Sabina, is actually, if you could just walk us through
what each of these are? Okay.
what each of these is and clarify what that means about how that building can be used.
And the fact that perhaps the outbuilding and connector building are not on here, so
Correct.
to explain that.
Correct. So one of the ways that density is encouraged in Riverside is that it establishes a minimum and a maximum side yard. So in the case of, we'll just start with the house in the corner, I think it's a minimum of a 5-foot setback for a side yard and a maximum of a 20-foot setback on the side yard. What I'm talking about, the house, which is the first one on the left, the smaller one. Right there you go. Yeah.
People on the Zoom.
So this is a 22 by 25 feet in terms of dimensions. It's shown as 25 feet high. It's 1,200 square feet as shown here. It's a building type. This would allow up to 4 units on the inside. So it would probably be bigger if it was 4 units, but this could be 2 600 apartment units, which is standard for a 1-bedroom. If we go with a 1 parking space per unit, so that would be 4 parking spaces. That would be behind the building or behind the main facade. The next one moving up, the small residential building, what's shown here, I think this is a 30 by 80 foot building. It's 30 feet high. This is around 7,200 square feet. I did the math. I think this is around 12 residential units. I think this also has a 5-foot and a 20-foot side yard, flexible, 5-foot minimum, 20-foot maximum range, right? I can't remember if I already said this, but that 20 feet is enough to allow a driveway going back to parking in the back if the property does not have access to an alley. So that's where these side yard dimensions are coming in.
You get a lot and you intend to build a couple of units next to each other, but you're building one at a time. And so you have your 5-foot setback, but then you might have a 60-foot side setback on the other side while you wait to build up some equity to then build the second house. That's not possible. So it kind of forces you to build in the center of your lot.
No, because you can have a 5-foot setback, period. You could have a building with
As long as
5-foot
you've got
setback,
20
so
on the other side.
you only need 5 feet on either side. 5 feet is the minimum. So if you
The
had,
maximum is 20.
maximum is 20. So if you had alley access, you could build a house with 2 5-yard setbacks. No. These are good questions. These are good questions. Did my answer make sense?
No, I think you missed her question. So
I'm
the
sorry.
question is, she has a lot that's 100 feet wide, let's say, and she wants to build 2 houses, but she can't afford to build 2 houses at once. So she's going to build one. She's going to tuck it to the right side of the lot. It's going to leave her with 40, 50 feet of side yard setback until she builds the other one.
And because the max is 20, I'm not sure that I'm allowed to do that. Although maybe I could get rid of it.
So this is, I think, a Chris Flynn question, because I think if you did have long-range plans to do something, you would have a master plan. And I would imagine there's a way to phase in development of a master plan.
And then again, this is me being annoying and thinking about infill. And so again, then that suggests that I really have to put my house on the center of my lot to try and meet
The point
those.
is, what we're trying to do with this entire section is to clarify at the start of the section what our goals are. And then to do that in a way that builds in my mind anyway, a little bit of flexibility so that if an individual applicant can go to the administrator, whether it's the DRB or the zoning administrator, and say, listen, this is my concept. This is how I'm meeting your goals. Can you work with me on this?
Yeah.
And so I think your example would be
Doable.
perfectly doable in my opinion.
Okay.
I would think you would permit it. Your initial application would be for 2 houses, and that's what would be approved. And then you would build each of them as you would, which is how like lots of developments work anyway.
I actually want
What
to
if
ask,
you can build them for 10 years and you have this nice big yard? Yeah.
well, I actually want to ask David, because I think the standards, as we have been talking about, assumes you're doing a subdivision and you're coming in and doing everything and you're plotting all your lots at one time. A question that came up at the last planning commission meeting was, how does this work for infill development? And I've gone through the exercises to see how that would work out.
Okay, and that is at the crux of almost every.
Yeah, so I wrote that down.
Yes.
How would phased building plans be approved at a very small scale, not at a big scale, not at a big developer
Or
subdivision scale
not
at
even
like.
phased, but just like, are we forcing a situation that makes infill harder in the future?
Yeah, I mean, definitely not the goal. So if you're
Right.
finding holes in it, that's good. We can try to address them.
David, do you have an answer to the question that's more cogent?
My answer more would be kind of aspirational, is that you should be able to do that. You should be able to come in and get an approval for 2 buildings
Right.
on your site. You're going to build one now, and that by however means a clock ticks on a permit that's been released and not completed and the CO hasn't been issued, that there be allowances for some period of time. You couldn't be indefinite, but for some period of time, the administrative officer could set that time to allow you to build that second house within 5 years or whatever.
Great, so actually, here's the answer to your question.
In
In table,
You guys have thought of this. I know you have.
actually, well, I don't know, I didn't think of it. I don't think I thought of it, but David thought of it because it's in the administrative relief table. And the
Yes, it
first
is.
item under the administrative relief table is lot dimensions, relief amount allowed, minimum necessary. The whole point of this administrative relief is specifically that maximum lot dimensions can be expanded if it's necessary for residual portions of properties of blah, 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 blah.
Oh, right. It's exactly
That's
in
exactly
there.
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was exceptionally well
Yes.
done.
excited to get there.
Right,
So
but
sorry.
right? Beautiful, beautiful
Okay.
team.
It's like
So-
David thought of it. It's like David's done this
Right.
before.
Right.
And he's
And
done
it's
this before.
Right.
Okay, so you're continuing now to discuss building type.
Great.
Sorry
So,
to derail.
yeah, so then the small residential, I mean, you can kind of go through what's in the draft regs, but it reflects all of the setbacks and things like that. The next one, townhouses, this just shows a row of townhouses 30 feet high, so that's at the roof peak. It's 100 feet in length. There are specifications for the townhouses that each individual townhouse cannot be more than 30 feet. Your overall length of a run of townhouses cannot be more than 100 and,
Oh,
it's 100 and something.
yeah, 150.
Which translates to 8 houses.
But it's townhouses like at 24 feet. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not at 30.
We went through this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The number of townhouses per run range from 3 to 8. The minimum frontage, the maximum frontage width for a lot is 200 feet. And then the side yard requirements are anywhere from 5 to 20. So you could, if you had alley access, you could have a 190-foot run. So that'd be a run of townhouses with 5 feet on either side. Actually, no. You would have 170 because the minimum setback is 5. Actually, I was right. It could be 190 because you could get away with a 5-foot setback on either side and how that's distributed. There's a requirement here that the aggregate width of both side yards for row of townhouses cannot be more than 30 feet. So that would let you do 5 and 25, 10 and 20, 15 and 15. You wanted to do, give you flexibility. Yeah. And that's to give flexibility in terms of how you can get to parking in the back if you don't have an alley. So you could have a 2-way driveway that would be around 20 feet. You could have a 1-way driveway on one side that was 10 feet and then a 1-way on the other side that was 10 feet. So there's lots of flexibility in terms of how you could make it work. And then those are really the two on the far right are just repeats of the townhouse and house. The large residential commercial building, this is a 60,000 square foot building. It's shown here as 60 by 250 feet. The 60-foot width is your standard width for a double loaded hall residential building. So that'd be 25-foot units with 10-foot hallway in the middle. I believe I ran the numbers on this and it was 40 units at 800 square feet per residential unit. So this is kind of the collection of building types. Now these also have no ornamentation on them, so they're very blocky, but it gives you an idea of what the massing would be.
Is it 60 by 100?
It is 60 by 250. That's wrong.
I think so, right?
So that's what I'm
Yeah.
getting stuck on, but now I'm all of a sudden like,
Your label
Well,
says
but it's-
60 by 250.
It's stories.
No, that's
So
right.
how
That's
many-
correct. 60 times 250 is 15,000
Great.
times 4.
It's a story, not just a flat 60 by 100.
Right.
It's gross floor area. Was that what you wanted?
Yes, thank
Great.
you.
Any other questions on this? All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so this is sort of a report back on the working group's recommendations for the number of elements for each building type. So they range from the house to the large residential building. So what is shown here across the bottom, these are just the number of what we are recommending as element types for facades of both the principal and outbuilding on the street facing facade. So in the handout that was sent out, it's broken down further in terms of street facing facades and other elevations. So this is another change we're making to the regs. Is right now, there are lots of terms in the regulations like principal frontage, primary entrance, the public frontage. So we're trying to simplify all of that and simply calling it like you've got a street facing facade and you've like right now it differentiates facades and elevations. So facades are street facing elevations are not. So we're just trying to use more plain language. So in this scenario, I'm saying these are the street facing facades. You can generally see, this isn't really a great example, but as for the larger buildings, there are more elements required. You see that more on the outbuildings. What you do see here is for a house, when we look at it for an outbuilding, it really only, we felt like having one element on the side of the house was appropriate as opposed to having, requiring two or three. Chris, do you want to say anything more on this?
No, I mean, the one thing that I think is important to bear in mind is that in Riverside, the back of somebody's building is almost certainly going to face the front of somebody else's. And so in my mind, it's really important that these buildings be thought of not just from the street, but on all sides, because it's not a vast area. And I think the way something looks on the back is going to be really important because especially with the larger buildings, you're going to see them from all faces. And so I think that's an important thing.
And you can see as the buildings got larger, you can see that for the outbuildings and in terms of what I think we would expect in terms of prominence, like the large residential commercial building and the civic buildings. And both of those were saying your outbuildings just need to have the same number of ornamentation. Your outbuilding doesn't necessarily shouldn't read as secondary to the main building, which is more the goal in some of the smaller buildings. It's more for a traditional building form for Vermont. Any questions on this before I move on? Because I think if you want to move to the next slide, I don't know. Heidi, if you want to handle this slide, great.
Truly, it's what I do. Okay, so do the additional building types appropriately add to the diversity of buildings wanted in Riverside?
Are we discussing or answering?
I think we should discuss if there's any concern. We saw 3 additional building types, and then we also saw 3 multiple changes around facades. So going back to the original, which was the 3 types, if we add those, is that sufficient? Is there any other discussion that we need? So I think we're answering, Chris.
So yes.
Thank you.
Great. So the first was on building type. The second.
Right. So always hold on. We need to check in with Eric. Eric.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the questions that was just sort of in the back of my head, when we looked at the townhomes and the design, and we looked at the larger buildings, I didn't hear anything about it, and it may not be relevant, but is there a way to say the ground floor could be demised as one single unit, and the second and third floor could be demised as the townhomes, which would allow the ground level to be retail, office buildings, or whatever else, while maintaining the townhome structure up above? Or is this not the appropriate place to be talking about that?
This is a really good place, Chris, Eric, to make sure we all understand the importance of the building type versus the building use.
Yes. Yeah.
Did I get it?
No, I think the literal answer to your question is that is a building type that would be captured under the large residential, large commercial, because you would be able to do a ground floor commercial, and how you configure whatever's you would have a commercial use on the ground floor, at least that's how it's sort of traditionally intended, and how you use the upper floors, whether it is a traditional apartments or whether it's 2-story apartments or however, That's a decision for the developer to figure out how they want to design their building.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Did that make sense to you, Eric?
Yes, it does, and that's what I was hoping we'd get as an answer.
Great.
Okay, so team commission.
Like, we shouldn't vote because.
Okay, so they already know. So those of us who weren't part of the
Not vote,
subgroup,
but say.
do the additional types appropriately add to the diversity that we want?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we satisfied that that's enough additional types? That was not your question, but I'm asking it anyway.
We did also, even though it says additional, we did combine a couple.
Okay,
So we actually,
yeah.
we
So the redefine.
reduced and then we expanded the choices. Yeah.
So are we happy with the diversity that exists? All right, thank you, team.
Great.
So second one is, does the mix enable the appropriate mix of size and scale needed for a pedestrian friendly village?
Too big, too small, all right. Variety.
I think we said variety is good already by answering the first one, right? So the question is, anything that feels out of scale or under scale? If our goal is a pedestrian friendly village. I'm good.
You want to go back to the one more. Yeah.
The skill rates, recognizing that on this list is not the connector building or the outbuilding.
Recognizing it's a slightly oddly worded question, to be fair. Because what this diagram doesn't show is any of the elements that make it pedestrian friendly.
Right.
And so it's not the range of building types and sizes that makes it pedestrian friendly. It's how those buildings are treated. And so I think that's.
We put on that wording, right?
I definitely, yeah,
Stand
my wording.
Go back to the wording.
Well,
Okay.
I think we were asking about elements here.
Yes, but
That's where it looks like you were meant this
Yes.
question to be.
Because we
Yes.
we went from frontage types, remember frontage types and how complicated they were, and it's like, why do I have to have a porch and all that other stuff? And I think Chris came up with the concept of elements, and then they worked on a list of elements, and then once again, we consolidated, we expanded, and I would say my reaction to this question is yes, except in the building types in the range, and that a house has the same number of elements as the largest building type makes me think, should that largest building type maybe should have 4, but we don't want them to be busy. We don't want to create fake frontier town. Like, I'm just going to slap up this because that's what the code says. So it's really hard we tried to boil it down to the things that really matter to the street and the feeling of the neighborhood, the affordability of it, the variety of it, all those kinds of things. It's a little bit of you can't design all these, it's not a design thing. It's really more of a functional thing. So that would be my only question is, would 4 be more appropriate for that largest building type? Other than that, I was comfortable with it.
And those are just the minimum. Someone could put 10 if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they've got 3, then they're meeting the minimum standard.
Can I just add one thing too, that a larger building, particularly a larger mixed-use building, it may have 3 different of the elements that you've identified, but it's gonna have multiples of some of them, like storefronts.
Yeah. Right.
Show windows. It's gonna have multiple of those things. It may have multiple stoops or porches or things like that, not just one.
because we also, as a group, talked about, is it 3 elements total? Or is it 3 element types?
Yeah.
And it's 3 element types,
Types,
and they
yeah.
need to be evenly distributed on the building.
The idea that I don't feel strongly about one way or the other, but just kind of addressing your like question brainstorming for those larger buildings, is it 3 element types on the ground floor? So
It's what he just said, 3 element types distributed.
no, I know, I understand.
So-
I'm saying, but you're saying like when you get to that bigger side, is 3 element types enough for a really large building? And so my question is that a way of
Right, so maybe we should think about that, making sure that on the larger buildings.
But I don't
I don't know that
think,
it's necessary.
I don't think you want them exclusively on the ground floor.
I don't think you want
No,
to
not
explicitly on the ground floor, but like if you had a minimum, if you just had a different set of requirements for the larger
Right.
building to address.
Right, all right, so
Your
can we
concern.
think about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So do you want to principles? I think do we have any principles we want them to follow? Because you're sort of so lovely offering this.
Yeah, no, I think we get
You
the
know,
gist.
you need.
No, I think you guys are doing a great job. I have no.
All right. So Heidi, back to the question, then do the element types
Thank you.
enable the mix of size and scale needed for pedestrian friendly?
And again, we haven't reviewed the element types yet tonight. The question really wants to be
Right, that's
about
true.
4 slides later.
Right, okay.
Okay, let's know that's the question we're gonna get
Okay.
to soon.
Well, let's see what's coming.
Is
up
that
next.
true? Here's what comes next in this project.
Well, the next is a summary. Like, we're not having a discussion on the element types. Did you want to talk about the element types?
No, I just think that we haven't, in fairness to the rest of the commission, we haven't really presented information. We haven't talked about information at tonight's meeting that would allow the answer to that question.
So why don't we move on to the next slide? Because that's, I think, gonna have so these are all the different element types.
Right.
Yeah. I think we're up to 16 now. Some of them are shown twice here, like there are 2 dormer windows shown. There's 2 types of window trim. These are the element types that you would need to choose from. You need to at least have 3 of these. It doesn't mean that you can't add another element that is not here. It just wouldn't count toward your 3. And it doesn't mean that you couldn't use 4 or 5 of these, but you have to use at least 3.
That's the bottom right-hand one. It's not quite showing. Thank you.
And that is specifically a 1-foot overhang. So I know last time at the last meeting, we mentioned that we were going around sort of like truthing things as we were.
Yeah.
Has anyone else?
Oh,
done
I've
that?
been noticing buildings in ways that I've never noticed them before.
Gotcha.
Right? Yeah. It totally opened my eyes in ways that I clearly had never thought of.
How many element types are on your home?
Well, I have a lot actually, as it turns out.
I think it's a lot more than I do.
I think so, right? I
But what was great is Chris brought in some very modern buildings, and we were able to, get to 3 on them. Like they had recessed entries, they had trim, they had something, a roof entrance marquee. Some definitely had 2, 3 we were stressing it, but we were getting there.
So, Susan's comment about Frontier Town and the element types and this recessed entrance. I was recently traveling and was noticing elements, and I came upon a building that had a recessed entrance, but it was a false entrance. So it was there, it was an element, but it really did nothing for the building except meet that requirement on paper. So I'm wondering if we,
So there was no door.
no, it was,
Or not an
it was
operable
not an
door?
operable door. It was just, it met the written requirement, but.
Well, you sent a picture of windows
Yeah.
that weren't really
And
windows.
it had windows that weren't really windows. So question about the voids and how they, are applied in this document might be useful.
Do we care if they're not
Yes.
functional?
Yeah, we do.
We do, okay.
And this gets, I think, specifically to the voids requirement. So like, are windows and doors that are kind toward your voids, are they really voids? So I think you had asked me about that earlier, and I think a way to get at that is to include a definition of what a void is, so that it's clear that it's not just something painted black with window dividers and trim on it.
And the recess entrance could certainly say must have an operable door.
Right,
Must actually be an entrance.
each of the element types will have definition.
Yeah.
So when it's appropriate, we can make sure that it's functional.
I think David wants to weigh in too.
So I don't know in kind of the current iteration, because I've not had a chance to go through it, but in previous iterations, I believe there's language to address both of these issues. One is that the principal entrance that requires a door a certain number every feet on a principal entrance to accommodate larger buildings, and it must be an operable door during business hours for non-residential use and for occupants for residential. I forget what it says, but it specifically requires, in order for it to meet the requirement of a primary entrance, it has to be operable and open. There are also requirements about when the voids to be considered, that you have to be able to see inside to a certain depth. And it can be that, there may be display and other things like that behind it, but you have to be able to see so many feet into the space.
This building has them on the second floor too, big windows.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what
A lot of
David,
times you see it on upper
Never
floors.
see it, you could never see in those windows. I mean, the 8-foot rule wouldn't apply,
Yeah.
because you would never be up that high up.
the 8-foot rule that David is referring to, when you look at the elements table, there's a storefront element, which I think it's a 60% void on the ground floor. You meet that requirement, and there's a show window, which is a projecting window at the ground floor. Both of those have that 8-foot clear distance on the inside. I don't know if there is a general requirement that every window has to be operable, but every window you have to be able to see in it. I don't know if we would want to say for every window that you that's where I think including it in the definition, that it's not just
Fake.
right. It has to really be avoided. Yeah. Have you seen that dealt with in other?
Yeah, and it's typically the issue for shop fronts, right? It's not for a residential use where, you might expect there to be curtains or something that would prevent you in a higher elevation, particularly if it's a residential use, prevent you from just peering right in the windows and seeing what's on the dinner table.
I think some of the buildings, I don't know this for sure, but I think some of the buildings on the main street in Stowe, I'm not sure if the second floor windows are real, like in Shaw, the grocery, the Shaw's building.
Yeah, probably not at a grocery store like that.
Yeah. But they could be. Could be.
Good question. Comment. Okay, element types. Any other questions or comments on element types? Much simpler. This is Heidi, I want to call this the Heidi choose your own adventure slide.
May I ask?
Not at the moment, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Any other comments on this? Because the next slide is kind of a summary that wraps everything up. In terms of what we look like. Okay, great.
Ready.
So you want to go to the next slide. So we've talked about thoroughfares, we've talked about buildings, we've talked about elements, and what is shown here is kind of how all of these things are working together to create that public realm that we're talking about. So we've talked about what's the minimum right-of-way width. It's 55 feet. It's got the 2 travel lanes, it's got the 2 parking lanes, it's got the 5-foot tree box, it's got the 5-foot sidewalk. That's between the red lines, that's covered. We've got the building setbacks. What's shown, at least on the north side, is at least a consistent 5-foot setback on where those, they look like the commercial buildings, and they've got the sidewalk in front of it. And then where it said private space on the upper part of the right of way, that's green space. Those would have more of that residential character. And you can see here how both of those are working together, that the setbacks don't matter, just they don't have to be consistent, because we've got that consistent treatment at the curb that is creating that unified public space, and you've got that flexibility behind the sidewalk, but there's some consistency, although it's flexible, right? So that's where that flexibility comes in. And then the same thing's happening on the south side. So, and all of those pink things, those are where all the elements are that we've just been talking about. So we've got that nice pedestrian scale with all the things that we want to be able to walk around as a pedestrian, and we've got that nice scale out on the buildings that give us that nice human scaled experience. So this is good.
You want to go back to your question about do we have the right elements?
Sure.
So if I'm paraphrasing now. So do we feel like we have the right mix of elements and requirements about how many elements by building type to feel comfortable moving forward? Is that a fair summary? Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. A little homework assignment to make sure that the elements are engaging, especially at the ground floor, whatever that works out to be.
And that they are truly designed to be functional.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Eric, any questions or concerns? Or are you comfortable with having the right number of elements and range of options?
I think we've got a good menu for developers to choose from to make sure we have diversity in what the street appearance looks like while still having consistency in the setbacks. So yeah, this is good.
Great. Susan already summarized, but I'm just going to say it again. 2 outstanding issues, looking at the elements on larger buildings. We want to emphasize the ground floor. Is there something more we need for that? We'll look at that. And then the other thing was Sabrina's point about the voids, making sure that we got the right definition and make sure we're getting what we want for that. Great, thank you guys.
And SJ's going to send us cottage court examples.
Oh, great,
So
yeah.
we can sort of field test your cottage court dimensions.
Yes, thank you. I missed that. Thank you. That was a great discussion. So thank you.
Really good.
Thank you again, Susan and Chris B. I'm calling you Chris B, Chris F, Chris S. It's great.
Yeah.
A lot of work, and thank you for that discussion.
Crispy.
That's perfect.
Uh-oh, I hope I didn't start something there. So now I'm going to turn it over to David. He's going to give us a preview of some things we're going to be looking at in section 10 and what that's all going to
You're
involve.
gonna share, David?
No, you can just go to the next slide. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're changing gears from kind of the fun stuff, design, fun stuff to boring process.
Great way to start.
Yeah, you know, I mean, let's leave. There's no other way to paint this, but a lot of this is just trying to add some greater clarity to what's already in the code. So when we think about the whole process, you know, step back for a minute and understand that somebody walks into the office upstairs with an application to do something. So there's a permit application. Depending on what they want to do, that application is going to go through one or more different review processes. So, you know, if somebody wants to put up a sign, okay, that's pretty straightforward. Somebody wants to do a subdivision, that's a different animal. So the code identifies all these different processes. So the illustration here is just to kind of help make that point, and then the change in the language will then better define this. So something that's so as you look at this, you see the permit application on one end, the zoning permit at the other end. At the end of the day, when an approval is made, somebody walks out the door with the zoning permit to actually go build something. So those are your bookends of the process. What happens in the middle then are the red, the orange and the green boxes. So the green boxes delineate review that's done by the zoning administrator, and the orange boxes identify reviews that are done by the DRB. So you can see that, so basic review is maybe something you've not heard about before because it's not described in the ordinance, but it's what happens every day for something that doesn't have to go to the DRB and doesn't, have to go through the site plan review process. So, at least from a process perspective, it needs to be defined and given some sort of a name to it. So you have your basic review, and I'll touch on what kinds of projects that would undergo what I'd call a basic review. Next slide. Under site plan review, you have minor and major site plans. We've discussed that at previous meetings. So the minors are done by the zoning administrators and the majors go to the DRB. Conditional use clearly is a DRB review. Subdivision actually has 3 different types. Somebody who's doing a boundary line adjustment. They're not creating any new lots. They're just moving a line, an internal line. And those things are done by the zoning administrator. And then you have minor and major subdivisions, which are both done by the DRB, but the minors are smaller subdivisions where you allow for a combined review of the preliminary and final plat, and I'll illustrate that later. And then you have PUDs, dimensional waivers, and variances and appeals are the other types of reviews that are covered in section 10. So the next slide. So the basic review. So the question being, does the application involve only a fence, a pool, or a sign? That's basic, and the sections listed there are kind of where the code speaks to what are the standards required for those things. Is it a pre-existing lot or lots? Is it a permitted use? Are there 4 or fewer residential units in a single building? A total of 4 or fewer parking spaces? Construction or expansion less than 1,000 square feet of building area. These are all things that the zoning administrator right now reviews the application and approves or denies based on conformance with the code. So that's what the basic review is. Those definitions, if you will, or criteria are things that are exempt from site plan review. And you'll recall we discussed them, some of those in a little bit more detail last time I was here. So if the answer to those questions are yes, then the zoning administrator is reviewing it for compliance with the dimensional standards of the zoning district, which is found in section 5, and all of the applicable, and I emphasize applicable, development standards, general development standards in section 11. And I'll talk about why I emphasize applicable multiple times in a following slide. So the subdivision review process, we have simplified it by removing, I think it's called conceptual review, and I think we talked about this a bit, that it's really duplicative of what happens in a sketch plan review or the preliminary plat review. So as you can see here on the screen, your sketch plan review is pre-application. It's informal. It's getting the pulse of the DRB about, hey, I got a piece of property. I'm thinking of doing, a subdivision of, 10 lots, 10 buildings, whatever. You, the applicant, have not invested a whole lot of time and money in design and engineering and all the details that are going to make that work, but you kind of want to get a sense from the DRB. What do they think? Are they generally supportive of this? What kind of issues might they have so that you can incorporate them into your design work? Once that's done, then you come back with an actual application that starts the process and begins at the preliminary plat stage. That again is a bit more conceptual, but you're looking at the general layout of the lots, the general layout of streets. You're beginning to consider the concept of phasing. Is this a really big project where I'm going to do this part first, I'm going to do that part later, and the DRB is going to actually render a decision on that review, giving the applicant some homework. These are some things that we want to see changed or modified in this concept, but with those changes, we're generally supportive of the application. Applicant goes back, then they have that really detailed conversation with their engineer, detailed plan, stormwater, road cross sections, all of that detailed stuff to come back for the final plat review, where the DRB is looking to see, well, did you consider all the things we talked about in the preliminary plat? Yep, you did. Did you meet the requirements for the specific requirements for utilities and streets that the code requires? Yep, they did. Then they render their decision on that application and get a permit at the end of the day. So that's your subdivision process, a little bit simplified. Next slide, please. So again, coming attractions for section 11. So section 11 is a hodgepodge of development standards on a wide range of topics. There's a lot of good stuff in here, but it's not differentiated in any way as to which projects have to satisfy which of these standards, which could lead to requiring projects to meet a set of standards that's really not appropriate to the scale of the project. And I've highlighted then in red, well, this is something that really only is pertinent in a subdivision review. It's only pertinent in a site plan review. And am proposing a simple reorganization of this section so that in a first group, all permit applications, regardless of what the nature of the project is going to have to address access driveways, site layout, grading, water and sewage disposal, utilities, stormwater, those things. Every project's got to do that. The next group are applications that are subject to a site plan review. That is different. That's kind of a next level of review for projects that are more than 4 units, mixed use projects, things like that, where vehicular circulation, parking and loading, those kinds of things are very much applicable. Pedestrian access and circulation, lighting and landscaping. Those are where those site plan standards then get applied. And the final group are for those projects that involve a subdivision. So that's where your roads and vehicular and pedestrian circulation within those right-of-ways, the layout of lots on a site. And the last one that you can't see because it's hidden below that is recreation, open space, and common requirements. So what I'm going to do is simply reorganize these standards into these 3 groups so that it's very clear that these kinds of projects have to meet these particular kinds of standards.
So David, for section 10, are there going to be any changes? Like, I know it's going to be reorganized, but are there going to be any potential changes?
There aren't any changes beyond the changes that we've discussed, and I'm in the process right now of going through all of your comments, and many of those I've tried to address. Some of those were really more questions tried to answer, but they're not really any substantive changes to them. It's a matter of just clarifying, water and wastewater is not something that the town of Jericho renders a decision on, somebody else does, but it needs to have kind of the common references to the Department of Environmental Conservation that does that, and what their process is.
So I think that, I'm sorry, I think the big changes are the site plan and subdivision stuff, which we've already
Which we've
covered.
already covered, exactly.
And this is really just a reorganization.
Yes. So it'll look
No,
different,
that's good.
but
That's exactly what, when you say changes, you're thinking from the last time we saw a red line, because
Yes.
there is the changes. We are changing by making more applications qualified for zoning administrator review. That's the
Through the
goal,
minor
and that's
site
the
plan.
result that this is producing.
Yeah.
This is just making that result a lot easier to administer, easier for applicants to understand, easier for the public to understand, easier to read, easier to find.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. But the big goal of taking a big chunk of projects and saying the zoning administrator can do it, you don't have to go to the DRB, it's faster, cheaper, more reliable, more convenient. That change is being made.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I have.
I love it. And I love the reorg.
Me too.
So helpful. And it leads me, you know how, David, I love myself a flow chart. You know, right? Feel like this is getting really close to like what that flow chart is for the individual who knows nothing and is coming in. It's like, here's my situation. Here's the branch. Which way do I go? I think you're getting really close there. And I think that would be super helpful in terms of user friendliness.
Yeah.
Which is what, and sort of another piece of what we're hoping to achieve. So thank you.
And those kinds of, I'll say devices, flowcharts and things that help to better inform and help somebody through the process. Those are things that in some cases they're helpful to include in the code. In other cases, they're helpful to not include in the code, but to create as kind of parallel documents that walk people through, because then you can change them as, you know, well, that doesn't really work quite right. You want the flexibility to be able to adapt them. And as you are experiencing certainly now, that making actual ordinance changes is not as timely. Simple. I didn't say not fun. Simple. As we'd like it. Okay.
Great.
This is very exciting.
Yeah,
I
really.
love this. I don't think this is boring at all.
Yeah, I didn't get it either.
I'm like all over this.
Apparently I'm a process person.
Right? Me too.
That's why we do the work that we do.
Anything else for David?
Fabulous, thank you so much.
If you go to the next slide, this is just a real quick kind of like what's next. So chapter 10, permit review. So hopefully we'll get a draft out to you before the next commission meeting. It won't be a lot of content. It'll just be how it's organized. We will get you some answers and updates based on the discussion we had today for the what we already covered. We still need to review a lot of this with Chris Flynn. He has been providing some comments. He looked at the draft of section 13. Minimal change on that, so that's good. Some additional outreach. So I've reached out to some property owners. So those meetings are set up. So I'm going to be going over with them what some of the big moves are. And then I'll need to get started on the town planner report for all of this stuff. So we'll have that in time for the April 29th meeting so that we can go to a public hearing by the May 6th, May 18th, sometime in late May.
I feel like this is a question that's been addressed before, but I can't remember the answer again. Is additional outreach talking with DRB members who are interpreting and using these things? I understand that there's like a little bit of a wall between our work and their work, but as the primary users of...
I've talked to Chris Flynn about this, and he is the main conduit that we are working with for that specific answer for that specific question.
We did also have a DRB person here at one of our meetings not that long ago. Oh, maybe you weren't here.
So I didn't do this intentionally, but actually we are like nearing the finish line. Or finish line, but.
There. Yeah, nicely done.
Yeah.
So we have another meeting on the 15th on this topic. Chris gave us a deadline. All our comments, planning commission comments are due to him by April 18th, so after that next meeting. We're hoping to have the red line polished in time for our meeting on the 29th. And then we would have a hearing 30 days after that.
It's
15
like
days,
something like
20,
that.
something.
There's a whole
Bunch of days.
process that I will
Yes.
handle and make sure the notice
Yes.
is going on.
Okay,
That's it.
next slide.
Next slide.
Okay. So you guys have been so patient and you're very quiet. We really appreciate it. That was a lot of work that this group has been doing for many months. It is late. We still have things on our agenda. As you said, we are still working on this for another couple of months. So it's not your only chance to ask a question or make a comment. So if you have a question that could just be emailed to Chris, that would be better. If there's something you're burning to say at this meeting right now, I welcome those comments. How's that? You sure? No, I do. I really do. But I am looking at the time and it's 8:45. But I really do appreciate everyone's being here and would love to hear some comments on our
We
work.
have great teachers.
Yes, I know that.
I think that if Greg wants to say something, we should ask him.
Absolutely.
I just appreciate all the hard work you guys have put into this. It's pretty amazing, really, because this is quite a project. And I know that you put hours and hours and hours into it. And I appreciate that, trying to make this development so that it's feasible for people to live in it. I think that's kind of what your charge is. And other than that, you know, I'm having fun too. So it's neat fun if we could start building something, but we will at some point. I did have a little update on the Act 250. It does look like we're not going to be exempt. So that's kind of a bummer.
It's private.
Yeah. So looks like we have to go through the process. We're trying to work around the system a little bit, but probably not going to get too far by the looks of things. So thought I'd give you that update, but I do appreciate you folks giving up so much to make your town feel and look like the way you want it. And so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What is it?
Other comments? Yeah, Laurel.
Of course I have a question.
Yes. But can you say your name and come forward? He was right next to the microphone, but.
The meeting will be over by the time I get there, which is part of my question.
Yes.
Elements, ramps. It doesn't look from the pictures like a front ramp has enough running space. And I didn't see ramps in the element. So that's just a consideration that would be very important to many of us, myself included. So I want to make sure that's in there and that it is, I think it's, I don't remember exactly, but I think it's like 3 feet per 9 inches. There's a lot of running space.
1 and 12.
1 inch and 12.
Yeah. So that's my
a good point.
concern.
We'll look at that for sure. Thank you. Other comments?
Huh? Okay, Bill Butler, Wisdom House. I'll be done by the time I sit down. I know that there is an element within the town that wants to put a swimming pool somewhere in this whole thing. And so I just want you to know that. And that's a big building by its nature. So how do you fit that in? But I know this is kind of brewing and people are asking me. Eric, you asked me about that. So
Okay.
this is your soup.
All right, we'll look at that too. Thank you for giving us the homework. Other comments? How about people online? If you have a comment, if you could use the raise hand feature.
I'll sleep.
We're good. I know, really. Yeah. Okay. All right, you ready to move on? All right, thank you, everybody. I really do appreciate, I do welcome the comments. I was really joking, but okay.
That was your April Fool.
Yeah, no, not really though. I mean, I'm serious that it is late, and that's not the only opportunity. Because you go home and you think about something and you're like, oh, darn, I forgot to ask. And we're here, and Chris is here full time in the office. And we're having ongoing dialogue. Okay.
Next time, can I just get my questions to Heidi? She's pretty good.
Yeah, she is, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe she'll sit here next time. Okay.
No.
So now we're going to topic number 6, which is the municipal planning grant. And again, I'm gonna hand it off to Chris.
Yeah, we'll talk about that real quick. So we've talked, this was a while ago, applying for a municipal planning grant. So initially we talked about applying something for the natural resource overlay work we're going to be doing, and then also to bring CCRPC on board as a manager for a stormwater task force. We found out that this grant is still current. A municipality can only have 2 active grants at a time. So we needed to narrow down to just one of the 2 proposals. We decided to move forward with the Jericho Wastewater Project Manager proposal. We've already put a proposal into CCRPC to include that as a UPWP project, so we will know that answer by June. This time, the municipal planning grants and the UPW things are out of sync. They're usually in sync, but we have moved forward with the UPWP application to CCRPC, and now we are applying for the municipal planning grant to fund that with the Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development. We have money in the budget to cover this, but this is, if we get this money for the grant, then we can reallocate that for something else. So as part of applying for this grant, there needs to be a formal motion and support from the Planning Commission supporting the grant application. So there needs to be a formal action.
I'd like to make a motion to endorse the grant application for the municipal planning grant for Jericho Wastewater Project Manager.
Second.
Sabina seconds. Okay, any discussion?
I can't stand the acronyms, so can you just remind us that you use 3 different acronyms there?
So I was going to say, I remember what you'd be, Unified Work.
Thank you.
Plan, Unified Work Planning.
Unified Planning Work Program.
Okay.
Work plan.
MPG is Municipal Planning Grant. So those are, if there was a third, I don't think.
CRPC.
Oh.
That was the only one that I recognized.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good night, David. Thank you.
David.
Okay, so Sarah Jane made the motion, Sabina seconded, Heidi asked the question. Any other questions or comments on the motion to endorse the grant application? Okay, ready to vote? All those in favor of endorsing the grant application say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? And we saw Eric raise his hand, aye. And Nancy, while I'm thinking of it, the person who made the comment was Laurel Shelmandine for the minutes. I'm not sure she gave her full name. Okay, next.
So the other is wastewater task force members. So we're anticipating the select board taking action at their next meeting to create a wastewater task force. You can see on the screen, these are the task force members that were included in the recommendations from the Planning Commission to the select board. They are moving forward with those recommendations. So ideally chaired by a select board member, 2 planning commission members, town administrator and or town planner, and then 2 to 3 residents with varying different levels of expertise. We wanted to have a discussion about who the 2 planning commission members were. So I don't know if you want to, oh, no, I will do that. So the thinking is that the 2 members would be Chris Brown and Susan Brissy. So I just wanted to get confirmation that was the direction to go.
As the chair, to clarify, originally I really didn't think that I necessarily had the time and expertise, but really looking at the charter, looking at the plan, looking at how important the project is to the planning, it seems like it's the chair should do it. That's kind of what they thought.
If you do that, Susan, is there anything else that you're doing that maybe you need to share? I mean, I love that you're willing to do it, but I also know, like, I don't want you to be spread so
Yeah,
thin.
I think that the task force will want the planning commission members, individual members, to help with individual tasks. So for example, like I'm hoping that Wendy would continue to participate with the UVM interns. I was thinking that Eric would potentially be a good person to reach out to and work on some of the like public-private partnership thinking, that Les would work on housing considerations, natural, everybody has their areas. So I sort of think of it as like just kind of being the person to keep tabs on it, and that actually Chris would be the lead and I would be his support person, but then everybody would be able to participate and contribute. Also, since we're almost to the finish line on the zoning work, I think that'll, it's kind of the next one in the queue, so I think we'll be okay.
Does this need a motion?
I don't think so.
It's just more general
Just an
decision.
update, unless anybody else was dying to do it.
Appreciations,
Okay.
great appreciations.
Okay,
Great, I think that's it.
you're still willing, you haven't
I am
changed your
willing,
mind,
yes.
okay,
Committed, willing.
I love that.
okay.
We're gonna make it happen.
Have the people in the fourth bullet point been sort of identified and asked at this point, or?
So some suggestions have been shared with the select. board.
Yeah.
But that's actually a good point. If you have ideas of who would be good, and they specifically, or maybe this came from our recommendation, specifically with these areas of expertise, that would be great. Those suggestions should go to Paula Carrier, ASAP, because she is starting to reach out to people.
And it's the select board who will be appointing folks.
They'll be establishing the task force and appointing members. Yeah.
Is there any idea of how soon that would start?
At the idea that it would be happening at the next meeting. So I think that they
Okay.
were going to be this coming Thursday. It's been rescheduled to next Thursday. So we'll have them at the April 10th meeting. The plan is for it to happen at the April 10th meeting.
And when did the interim start?
We can move the next slide.
We did not plan
Plans and
this.
questions.
All right.
If I can make a quick suggestion on the public members, it would be, in my opinion, very important to have at least as many of them as possible, at least one and ideally two, who are in the affected area where the wastewater will be implemented first. So we are hearing from the people who are going to use it, rather than a bunch of folks who are far away, who are never going to connect into it in the near future.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you.
Am I up?
Yeah.
Okay. Town panel report. So Leahy Institute intern, we have two interns that have signed their agreements to be on board. One will be should be starting, I think, May 12th. The other is currently finishing up some studies in Europe, and she'll be joining us in early June. So that's great. I have a meeting Thursday at UVM, help start to flesh out what the learning program is going to be for the one intern that's here. So that's awesome, and that's moving along. Future land use map update. So if you haven't seen it already, the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission has released the draft future land use map. It's been shared with the working, so we have a working group. It's Sabina, SJ, Susan, and myself that is looking at that specifically for Jericho. The working group is meeting on April 14th to kind of come up with what our thoughts are on that. And then immediately after that, we're going to be meeting with staff from CCRPC to share our comments with them on that. This will be coming to the Planning Commission for a formal comments, as well as the select board. Jericho's formal comments to Jericho, to the CCRPC need to come from the select board. So we are working with CCRB to figure out what those dates are. I think some dates were given earlier, but those are being pushed back. And those recommendations can be made to CCRPC after the May 19th public comment period is closed. So that gives us a little more time.
Chris, can I ask a question? I think I heard you say that it requires the select board
Yes.
action. How versed are they in where this is going already?
So Catherine McMahon's is on the CCRPC
Right.
board, so
Okay.
she's up to speed on that. And part of the discussion with CCRP, Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission staff, is how to brief the select board so that it's just not showing up all at one time. Yeah. I'm going to sort of I'm just going clockwise. So regional housing targets. So the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission has also released regional housing targets. They have identified a need by 2050. It's like between 15,000 and 47,000 housing units that just to meet the basic need. It's not what we've got. And they have a methodology for how they have distributed housing targets for all of the municipalities within Chittenden County. So the working group that's working on the future land use map, we're also going to be looking at that and folding what at least our recommendations are for the planning commission to consider, then before it goes onto the select board. So that's also something that's coming along. And in the packet, there's a link to where those ranges are if you wanted to know more about that.
It seems like an oddly big range.
The number that I had heard before this was released was somewhere around 30,000. So I don't know where those ranges are.
People.
Yeah. These are also targets. So in some ways they're very aspirational, but we need to be doing what we can as a municipality to see what we can do to do our bit to help address the housing issues in Chittenden County. Which we are.
Of course we are.
Yeah.
Can I go back to things? The Leahy Institute intern. I know that was two things, right?
2 interns.
Two interns. I know that Wendy is primary with you on that. Do you need backup while she's not fully engaged?
It's all good. It's a lot of administrative stuff, working with UVM and just making sure that all the paperwork is filled out so that they're on our payroll system.
Okay. If anything else comes up and you need someone, I'm happy to.
I appreciate that. I will not forget that.
Okay.
Yeah. Sort of jumping around. So there's a joint select board planning commission meeting. Thank you guys for filling out the doodle poll twice. The new date now is April 7th. We rescheduled it. Everyone committed it except for Heidi. Sorry about that, Heidi.
And as it turns out, sadly, I am going to be in town.
Oh, great. Great. So that'll be
Yes.
5:30 to 7:30.
He's going to be here. I can't make it. So
April Fools.
Yes.
So, April 7th, just make sure that's on your calendar. We're working on a draft agenda for that. Well, a packet will get sent out by the end of the week, so I have something to take a look at over the weekend. I don't think it's going to be too much. It'll just be like for awareness. The last thing I've got is VCTL is offering a capital planning forum on April 10th. It's in Barrie, 9 to 4. If you are interested in attending, let me know ASAP. The registration date is April 3rd. I think they have a wait list now, so there's no guarantee, but maybe we'll get on it. I know Paula is going. I think when they went to register me, that's when we got the wait list notice. But just let me know if you're interested in that. Capital FY27 capital budget planning is on the planning commission's work plan for this year to be starting hopefully sometime in July. So I think it would be really great for as many people to go as can, if there's going to be room. And it's in person, it's not virtual. That's it.
It would be great if they usually do this, like share the materials after the fact.
Yeah, there's a lot of materials already online
Is there?
too. Yeah,
Okay.
the Vermont Bond Bank has a lot. BHFA has a lot. Other towns, you can look at other towns' capital plans. And yeah, they usually do have a decent amount of stuff. Okay, any other updates from other planning commission members?
I have one, just that, I'm looking for a date if anybody wants to go with me to the Chittenden County Housing Meeting. It's April 30th
At the Hula thing.
at Hula, yeah. So it's
I will be
dinner.
there.
Ooh. Oh, we're gonna have a good time. Okay, great.
Have you been to the Hulu building yet?
I've driven past that.
It's beautiful.
It's not the same. Gotta go inside.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'm officially the liaison with the JCDC.
Yeah.
I would love to not, I'm not gonna have time to do that.
You are not
Yeah.
gonna have the capacity.
So I would love to pass that on to somebody else.
Okay.
I'm willing to take track on that. Be kind of a fun thing to do.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you, Eric.
Yep.
I can put a check mark right down and put it on my to-do list and now it's already done. Yes. Okay, anything else from any other plan commission members on your updates or reports?
I mentioned the tree grant yet.
I don't think so, not here.
The Conservation Commission, was awarded a $20,000 grant to purchase trees to put in various places around the town.
Really great.
Where are you gonna put them?
All around. I can share the details.
Okay.
Congratulations to you.
Yeah, that's great.
That was a great effort. Okay, any other business? So our next meeting, April 15th, will be primarily finishing the updates to the zoning, focused mostly on section 10. But given that the deadline for all the comments is April 18th, but we don't yet have David's red line yet, just plan for your schedule. It's going to be a little bit tight for us to do as much quick turn as you can from the 15th to the 18th.
So I will not be here on the 15th.
Okay. And are we going to do another red line on chapter 13 to incorporate all this feedback or not? It'll just be part of the
I
final.
think it'll be part of the final.
Okay. Okay. Motion to adjourn. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Sabina, second. All those in favor of adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Eric said aye online. Thank you very much.